I'm like a giddy kid. I'm so excited for today. I was like, Africa's coming on. And I feel like I don't even know where to start with you, my love. But it's funny, like right before we got started, I was thinking about why I felt so excited to see you and the way it feels to be in your energy. And,
Mm.
Africa, for those of you listening, and I went to a summit together in Ibiza and just got to spend some time in workshops together. And I got to sit in on your workshop. And I was thinking about how much when you are in your presence, there's just such a way that you hold everyone in the space,
Mm.
regardless of what room you're in a way that's like, I see you and your humanity, and you're so safe with me and so loved by me. It's just like the energy that you emit. And, it's so funny as I was reading this. This beautiful holding up Africa's book for those of you who are listening. Just work of art. I like everything about
Oh,
your book is
wow.
just so incredible. It's so dog-eared. But it's like you give the tools to how to show up in life that way to other people. Because I was thinking, I wonder if Africa's always been this, but in this book, you genuinely are sort of like, here's how you show up this way, and here's how you listen this way, and are in present-centered awareness with people this way. So,
Mm.
first of all, just thank you for this book. I feel like it is something that humanity needs in this moment
Mhm.
in history so desperately.
That's
I'm
right.
so grateful for it. And I guess just how did you know to structure it that way? Like, how did you come into the space of, I'm going to share this
Mm.
information of
Yes.
like how to listen and be present? Because I think there's so much about, we don't necessarily get these tools in school, these
Mm.
like
Hmm.
interpersonal relational skills. Nobody teaches us how to do this.
Mm-mm.
Yes.
So how did you know to approach it that way, I
How
guess?
did you learn?
How did you do that?
Thank you. And you know what? I'll answer that question. And first, I just want to acknowledge everything that you have just said. And because as you were speaking, it was filtering through my body. And I just feel so, so grateful because I remember um, us meeting at Intelligent Change Summit, and you were running your own workshop and your talk, and a friend told me about it. Quite a few people actually were going around saying that you have to be at this talk, and a few friends of mine had told me that it's something, because of what I was experiencing in my own personal life at the time, that it's something that I am going to connect with immediately. And because
Mm.
of the people that were telling me, I didn't even need to ask, where is it? What time is it? Who is it? It was an immediate, full bodied yes. Um, and then we were waiting for everything to be set up, and you and I just laid eyes on each other and just magnetized towards each other. And we embraced such a deep embrace. And I felt as though we had known each other for a long time. And you spoke so much life into me. And it was just one of the best and most profound encounters I've ever had. And it's something that I recount to people often, actually. And so I think for me, it was a beautiful way to meet, because from that very human connection, then I discovered your work and what it is you do in the world. And it just made perfect sense.
Mm.
And I'm moving through your book right now, Sovereign Love, and I'm grieving the end of a relationship. And it has just been whatever the third perspective has done for you. Your book has done that and more, is doing that and more for me right now in real
Mm.
time. So thank you. Thank you so, so much. Thank
Do
you.
you see what I mean about her? It's like
First
the
of all, I love that
embodiment
I'm
of
hearing
magic.
the same version of the story from two different people, which I'm obsessed
Oh,
with because you both said the
wow.
exact same thing. It's exactly how Danae recounted the meeting to me, which
Oh,
I love. Like
wow.
totally just like,
It's
synchronicity, kind of the
amazing.
way
And then to discover the podcast and space that you both have created, and for me to be able to go back into your archive and listen to you both, and to get to meet you, Vanessa, today, and to then continue on to discover more about who you are. It's really exciting and so beautiful. So thank you so much. I'm very grateful. Very, 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 very grateful.
No
And then I'll
worries.
answer the direct question of the third perspective. So um, I always invite people to kind of just feel into how you would describe that idea of the third perspective, or when you hear it, what do you feel, or what do you think it is, even if it's just for a moment. Because what I loved before I even started writing most of the book, I would go into my local bookstores every single week. I've been doing that actually for the past 6 years. Every single week, I go into my local bookstore just to sit down, have a little read, or talk to them or whatever. And I was asking so many people, when you hear the third perspective, what do you think?
Mm.
And pretty much every single person nailed the intention that I had with this book. Everyone was saying things like, it's an invitation out of the binary. And those exact words, an invitation out of the binary, were the words that I wrote 4 years ago in my journal. When I was saying that the open letter that I had written at the time, nearly 5 years ago now, actually, I wrote an open letter called Why I'm Leaving the Cult of Wokeness, which we can go into in more detail as we go. But that letter was my own declaration that I'm done with self-censoring, that I'm done with self-editing, that I'm done with walking on eggshells in my own mind and becoming so good and becoming such a good police woman that I start to police other people without even realizing that I'm doing that. And I hadn't even realized that I was in the clutches of self-censorship, of withholding my opinions and my ideas and my true thoughts and even my general expression, because I thought I would get into trouble for it, you know. And that thing of getting into trouble is a very interesting one because it has a very childlike quality to it.
Yes.
This feeling that you'll be punished, that you're always doing something wrong, you know. And that was the underlying thing for me. And I remember writing in my journal that surely there must be another option between saying everything and saying nothing, because I had made myself believe that those are the two options available to me. And I write about this in the book, actually, those exact words. I say saying everything and saying nothing are not your only options. So I wrote this open letter, and then after it wrote into my journal, and the language of the third perspective was in there. And I found that entry about a year ago, and I knew that this is what the book had to be. The book is an invitation out of the binary. It's inviting people to cultivate the capacity to hold difference within themselves and difference in other people, contradictions in yourself and contradictions in other people, to not find difference in worldview. And again, it's so easy to go to the extremes. Africa, what about the extremes? What about hate? What about etc.? What about the middle that we don't speak about? What about in a conversation where you would find yourself agreeing with things that are not actually true? What about when you're terrified to even ask a question? What about when if someone says this person is problematic, you shouldn't listen to them. You just take it. You don't even ask any questions. You don't even allow for yourself to be curious so you can make an informed decision. So for me, this book, outside of all of the things that are happening societally, I love, Danae, that you use the word interpersonal, because that's exactly where I like to bring everything. And for me, in writing it, that was important to not make this a political conversation or a conversation that is so big that we don't know what to do with it. I prefer to zoom in and bring it to the everyday as much as possible. So I wanted to make sure that this book doesn't just stay in the why, if you will.
Yeah.
Why is this happening around us? Why are we walking on eggshells around each other, but mostly in our own minds? And I call that the mob in your mind. I wanted to give people the how, to be like, okay, now that you're aware of this, then what do you actually do about it? But to also create a sort of roadmap that can change with you over time. So that if you go to it again in 2 years, you could go through the same process or just a single exercise and you're offered very new information about yourself. So I knew that it would be very easy to stay in the why, especially with the kind of conversation I'm having. I just haven't seen people talk about this, if we're going to say talking about the level of intolerance that we're starting to see in the world, the sort of culture of fear that we've created consciously or unconsciously. I find that it's usually from a very academic place, or we tend to hear it from the wrong people, people that don't have the best intentions, people that are bad faith actors that actually want to perpetuate the division. But I knew that the how component would be very important. So I made a very conscious decision as a developmental coach, as a consultant, as a researcher, as someone that's just fascinated with the human shadow, to bring in my own expertise and intellectual property and things that I have genuinely done, and then to bring the how in that way.
My girl. I mean, I cannot with you, my love. And you know what? I would love for you to tell a little bit more about that open letter, because what I was so struck by, and I think we've had this conversation, when George Floyd was murdered and there was the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, I was so just fascinated by what I was seeing unfolding online, and had such a visceral response of like, this is not how we get wherever we're attempting to go. Because I would hear so many people of color sort of saying like, sit down, white people, educate yourself. Like, don't ask me to like be in conversation with you. That's not my job at this point. Right. And I was like, if there isn't a way for us to have these conversations and feel like we're going to do whatever this is imperfectly, we're not going to be able to talk to one another. Right. And I'm just so, over the last few years, there's been more of this. So many of my clients have had all of these cutoffs with family members. People feel differently than I do politically. And so I can't be in relationship with, quote, people like that type of conversation. And I'm always like, listen, like, well, so many things. I feel like I never know where to go in questions with you, Africa. But, I think, one, I really struggle with a lot of these conversations being had online, because I think there's just such a lack of nuance, and we don't hear one another in our humanity in the way that I would love for us to. But I think there's a way that you speak to when you were in this space of recognizing that we were doing this like from the space of wokeness and from the space of righteousness that was so dehumanizing. And I'd love if you'd tell a little bit more about that open letter for those who haven't read it, and read that.
Yeah. And I would also love to know more as we go, because I think it's all part of the conversation about both of your experiences on that side. Because what I find is that not many people actually have the space or the environment or the relationships where they can be so honest about how they experienced that year, especially people that have been racialized as white. And I find that even though I can say to some people that I know, that I'm genuinely curious to know what it is that they experienced, they still feel at times that they need to undermine just how painful and confusing and emotionally and psychologically damaging all of that was, and how there was something quite religious about it. I think of it as it was a time where if you were white, and I'll go into the details of my story, how I even came to be aware of so many of these things, that if you are white, you are born with the original sin, if you will, and you have to spend the rest of your life atoning to it. Otherwise, you remain a sinner being a white supremacist. There's something so sinister about it, because it doesn't take, right? It doesn't take context into account. It doesn't take humanity into account. What if you're a young girl or a young boy that was adopted by a Black family or by an Asian family, and that's all you have known for your entire life? How do you even begin to make sense of any of it? What if you were born in Africa or in Asia? If you're a white person in Norway or a white person in Kenya or in India, is it the exact same thing? Again, but you couldn't ask these questions because it's not supposed to make sense. You're just supposed to take it, and you're just supposed to, quote unquote, start doing the work. Again, it's very religious and cultish in its operation. It's not supposed to make sense. You're supposed to find a way to make the senseless make sense. Right. And that is it. That is your job. Right? So for me, that open letter didn't just happen in 2021, as in I had realized all of this for the past year and I pressed publish. I would say that around 2017 is when I started to notice that something a little bit strange is happening in how we communicate. So I had started sharing my journey of getting sober. So I was an addict from the age of 14 up until I was 24 years old. And I had relapsed many, many, many times. And when I speak about this, I always want to make it clear that when I talk about relapsing and trying to get sober again, I'm not talking about, having a really bad hangover and saying I'm not going to drink again and then just finding yourself drinking again. I'm talking about having really bad lows, extreme lows. and then making a big commitment to just get rid of alcohol and drugs and to turn my life over, because my life was entirely fractured. My relationships, I couldn't hold down a job for longer than a couple of weeks. If I could have been in a job for a month, it would have been an absolute miracle. I didn't know what it looked like or felt like to be a reliable person. I knew chaos and uncertainty and waking up and probably having to apologize for something, but getting some kind of adrenaline rush from the kind of fixing. I knew how to fix because I was always in a state of chaos. So my relapses would happen because I would experience so much discomfort in things going well. When I would look at my journal and see that I have been sober for 2 months or 3 months, I would feel so uncomfortable. When I would show up to work on time, when my relationships started getting better, when I was no longer feeling just so sick physically in my body, I would just feel so uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. And I didn't have the language for that at the time. But I didn't know the intricacies of addiction. I didn't know the nature of self sabotage. All of these things that I ended up discovering later in life, things that have become my work and my area of study. But when I finally was able to get sober at 24, I turned to social media. So I was sharing my personal story out loud, and it was an anonymous journal at the time, the very same Instagram page that I have today. If you scroll all the way down, you can see day one, the post that I shared on November the 7th, 2016, saying that I am in the clutches of alcohol and I don't know what to do. I don't know who to turn to. I need help. So everything that I've created today started from that very first post. All of it was a beautiful accidental miracle. I didn't intend to build the community that I did, but my story was picked up by the UK media quite quickly, probably because of my age and just how compelling the entire thing was. Um, but then I got labeled pretty quickly, but I accepted the label as a sobriety advocate. And then from that, it quickly shifted into being a sobriety activist. And then over time, the sobriety piece was dropped down and suddenly I was just an activist. And again, I didn't give myself these titles. They were given to me because of my recovery, being a Black woman, being an immigrant, all of these identity markers that again allow for labels to be placed very easily. But personal responsibility here, I actually liked it and I owned it, even though it wasn't given to me, because I felt like I was being taken seriously. And having this label allowed me to be accountable to what it is that I was doing. So it worked quite well until it didn't. Until suddenly I'm expected to campaign for things that not even that I don't care about them, but things that I'm unaware of, things that are just not in my realm of consciousness, things that are just not local to me, things that might be more important for North Americans, although I love my Americans, but we are expected to care about it doesn't matter if you're in the jungle in Zimbabwe,
obnoxious.
you better know what's happening in the States.
They're so obnoxious. Yeah. I hate it here.
Die.
Oh, the worst.
Isn't it amazing?
We are so like the petulant like toddler of the world. It's like the egocentric 3-year-old that's like, no, I want it.
It is actually amazing.
Oh my God.
So I suddenly was expected to talk about, this is now 2017, 18, intersectionality. So now you have a lot of whataboutism. So
Right.
what about Black women who are in recovery? What about Black disabled women who are in recovery? Can you talk about trans Black women? And again, I wanted to, because it was expanding my world. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that there are people. But that's where, to me, when you don't choose the thing, I didn't choose to say, okay, I want to expand my work in this way because I understand it. When something is not a choice, you do start to shift your thinking and your language in order to please, because now I need to make people happy. And that's where modifying my language started happening. I started having people, because by this time I was also talking about sexuality, because in sobriety, I realized that I had a lot of unaddressed sexual shame. I'd been very promiscuous from a young age, but very disconnected to myself as a sensual being. So when I would talk about those experiences, it slowly started to happen. People saying, when you say the word women, you need to say women and femmes. And I was like, fine, of course. Okay, I want to be inclusive. And then it becomes, when you're writing the word woman, and this was at the time, it's changed now, you put an X instead of an E, because then it includes all women. And again, it's fine because I want to make sure that I'm being inclusive. But then I quickly realized, and the thing you said, Danae, is something that I noticed at that very time, that the platform in which we're trying to do all of these things make us behave in very abnormal ways. It's not the way that people actually speak. And also, you will never get it right, because someone might say, modify your language in this way. Then someone comes in and says, hey, that language is outdated. We need to use this language. Then you take that. And it's never enough. Never ending. So that's where my self-censoring started. But I could have never realized that, because I was still speaking. I was still very outspoken about a lot of things. But I realize now I was outspoken about things that were approved, not things that were challenging in any way, not things that allowed for me to break out of the echo chamber. I couldn't bring any conflicting information into the echo chamber. So I had to play by the rules. So over time and up until 2020, all of that really hit a crescendo, because I suddenly noticed what I was participating in. I suddenly noticed that without even realizing, I had been kind of perpetuating aspects of cancel culture, you know, where there's just a level of just deep intolerance, public shaming, which is positioned as call out. I'm just calling you in. Actually, that's the language, which I find very patronizing. Calling you, who are you? Calling me in from bed. You're probably in bed trying to call me. What are we doing here?
And also, I don't know you, so why do you feel you have the authority to call me in anywhere?
I actually don't know you, so what are we doing?
I don't want to be called in. I don't know you.
You are welcome. Come in.
Thank you.
You are welcome. And 2020, because just of the nature of what was happening, I saw my own sort of just wanting to not get attacked by the mob to such a degree that I was willing to cross my own boundaries. I was willing to override my internal discomfort and being like, Africa, no, this is out of integrity. But I thought I needed to demand for other people. And this was in a very short time period, about 2 weeks, where there was this intensity of me finding myself looking at a lot of my interactions with white people, even people that had been my friends, sort of through the lens of scanning for malicious intent. Were any of our interactions to do with racism, or was it just probably racism? Everything sort of landing on racism is the answer for all of it. And I had this sort of out of body experience sitting on my sofa, which I'm looking at now, and just being like, what are you doing? I felt, and it's such a bizarre thing to try and explain, but it was, I could see myself behaving in a way that was so alien. It's like, the trance just broke completely, and I couldn't unsee myself in the way that I had, because I was being applauded for the outrage. I was being applauded for the reactivity. I was being told that I'm being good. And I quickly saw in that moment just how much deeper I could lean into my self-righteousness and be rewarded for it. And I just decided to go the other way completely. That's when I started writing that open letter in June. Yeah, it was in June 2020. And then I pressed publish on it. I started journaling actually, and aspects of that turned into the letter, because the letter I wrote in 2 hours, but I started writing what would inspire the letter, and then published it in January 2021.
I just feel so much of what you're saying, because I think that anybody who's online, who's in any sort of public situation, even those who aren't, but especially those who are, have felt some semblance of this. I don't care where you're from. I don't care what your, ethnic background is. I don't care. Like, everybody has felt their own version of this. And it just is so, it's hitting really hard. This concept of like self-censorship. And the impact that has, right? Of, I mean, Danae and my work obviously is around bringing the shadow to the light, integrating
Right.
shadow sides of ourselves, right? Kind of creating or establishing or refining capital S self. And if you're doing that work over here, and simultaneously over here, you're self-censoring and you're actively involved in this world of, we'll say, wokeness, right? And what
Mm-hmm.
that kind of brings. You're kind of canceling each other out in a way. You think you're doing
Absolutely.
this work, but you're actually not. It's very interesting.
Yeah. And it's exactly that. I saw that there was an incongruence that I
Yes.
couldn't just ignore,
Yes. That's
because
the
at
word.
this time I was already talking about the nature of self-sabotage. I was already talking about brave expression and courage and unraveling self-censorship, mainly in the context of, for years it had been in terms of recovery and just the shadow in general, that integration of the things that we repress. But I hadn't even realized that I was participating in the very thing that I claimed to oppose. I hadn't even realized.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that it's, and I love that the subheading is that like is that what it's called? Of your book is called Brave Expressions in the Age of Intolerance, because
Yes.
I think, really digging into what it means to be brave right now
Mhm.
is a fascinating thing to me, especially in this moment. I'm so struck by so much of what you get into in the book is how to have brave conversations. I love that, like, the catch line of your book that everyone keeps coming back to is living as if you've been canceled, or like it's
Yes.
something around that
Yes.
nature. But I think that has been the game changer in my life. Like just that embodied state of like nobody else is paying your bills today. Like what
Yeah.
other
Right.
people think of you is like you're gonna have to put that down. But it's all of a sudden, that is how I believe we are able to show up and be of service in this life. And this is, I think, the thing that I'm curious to ask you about in this moment. We are living through a time where not saying anything online is like what people are sort of really feeling
Mhm.
activated by. And I
Mhm.
need to know where you stand, and I need to be
Mhm.
able to identify whether or not you're a decent person.
You're on my side or
Mm.
not.
Yeah, and what side you're on. And I think I just feel such an overwhelm of like understanding around like where that comes from, because I
Mhm.
do think it's a way that we're attempting to keep ourselves feeling some sort of safety or something that we can like tether onto as a truth in a
Yes.
time when there's so much uncertainty.
Mhm.
And I certainly have felt, as someone, who's a little bit in the public sphere, like people
Mhm.
sending me messages and saying, like,
Mhm.
you're a mother. How
Yep.
can you not care about children
Same.
dying? And feeling like such a like visceral in my body. Like I feel really unsafe when people send me these types of messages. And I think I can't even remember the psychological phrase for it, but there's something that happens when we start to embody the thing that we're sort of like in an activism state, like standing against, and then I start to
Right.
become that thing
Mhm.
because I like have blind spots all of a sudden because I'm fighting against something, but I can't sort of fight against something
Mm.
without making it bigger.
Yes. Yes. You know what? I think about this all the time because um I've received, actually, I would say, since, I mean, as we're recording this in real time, there's an ongoing conflict in the Middle East that pretty much all of the entire world is aware of. And it's been
Mhm.
happening for quite a while now.
Mhm.
And in that time, I would say I've received about 3 messages from people, which in the grand scheme of things, it's not a lot of people, but um, 3 people saying, for someone that speaks about brave expression so much, I find
Mhm.
it funny how I'm going to need a
Mhm.
t-shirt that says, I
I
find it
find
funny
it
how.
funny. Mhm. That's right. That's right.
I
Forgot how
find it
funny you
funny
are.
how you haven't spoken up about XYZ. And in these
Mhm.
3 messages, one of them is talking about one side and one of them is
Mhm.
talking about another side.
Mhm.
And what was interesting about that is that a couple of days before that, I had actually posted quite a few things about Palestine because I felt that it was right. What I was
Mm.
sharing didn't feel reactive in any way. It felt like it was right. And it was a donation link that was going directly to be giving something tangible. So to me, that felt true and that felt
Mhm.
right. Um, and the reason I say that is because, and me and these people, by the way, ended up having conversations, because I knew immediately, I felt what I like to call the initial ouch, where I'm like, who the fuck are you? I have no idea who it's literally like a stranger, not even knocking on the door, but just barging through the door and demanding that you prove your goodness to them. That's
right.
what I think of it as every single
Yep.
time. And because of that visual, I refuse to participate in it a lot of the time, because that's what I see, whether we like it or not. And I talk about this a lot in the book. Our social media pages, whatever it might be, we need to start thinking of them as our digital home. We don't have to put up with everything that someone brings in. No, it's inappropriate, it's unacceptable, it's condescending, it's patronizing. Who are you?
Yeah.
You know. But I did decide to engage, because I just had the capacity at the time to do that with these people. And then I was saying, I'm really going to ask you to get curious about why you think that because you haven't seen me share a specific post on social media, that you can assume my position. But not only that, you are willing to discard, because a lot of these people would say things like, I've been following you for years. So that's why
Right.
the disappointment feels so severe for them, right?
It feels so
Um,
personal.
they take it very, very personal because of
Right.
the parasocial relationship. And this is what I said to them. You have to realize we have a parasocial relationship where you feel like you know me. So the disappointment you have is as intense as it would be if I was a friend or a sister or your colleague or whatever else, which would still be very inappropriate. But please remember that we are strangers. So you're assuming that because you have not seen a post from me on social media, that means you can assume my exact position. What if that post expired and you just didn't see it on Instagram? What if the algorithm just didn't serve you my feed and you didn't see it? If I have been marching for the past 9 months in central London every single weekend and didn't post about it, then does that devalue the action? How do you know that I haven't donated thousands of pounds? But because you haven't seen me share or reshare an infographic that I could have reshared from bed just so I can keep the mob at bay and then continue without caring. Again, we don't think about all of these things. And again, all of those people, I say all, two of them realized, because it was three, two of them, we were able to have the conversation, but they represent a lot of people. It makes people start to think, oh, I never thought about what could be happening offline. Oh, I never thought about the fact that you could be living in a completely different part of the world and have a completely different algorithm and feed to me and a relationship to social media. I never thought about that. We assume that people live locally to us. We assume that people share the same worldview. We assume that people should respond and have the same amount of information. And then I thought to myself, okay, what about the genocides that are happening all over the world and the modern slavery that is happening in real time all over the world, the destruction that is happening in my country of Zimbabwe? Have you posted about it? Have you posted about it? No, I haven't, because there we go. I think I don't I don't buy into that anymore in terms of the pressure or the so-called shaming, because I realize that people have this sort of are in this like zombie like state when we're on social media, where we don't realize that an outside world exists. And also, what I would add for everyone listening, but maybe even also for myself, and I think this is sometimes hard for people to hear, in that not everyone cares about the same thing. And when I say that, I'm not speaking specifically to anything happening in the world right now. It is just a reality. We are not made to care and to know about everything happening in the world. We don't have, on a brain-based level, we don't have the capacity to hold it. We absolutely don't. So again, when I remind myself of all of these things, all of these different components, anyone can say what they want to say and it can't impact me, because I know that they're only living through a very small lens, and an experience of the world. But when I do have time, what I will do instead is to find a way to then make that a conversation in my work, to break it down in my work, instead of just getting annoyed by what someone says and maybe blocking them or whatever, which I will also do. but I start to think of what is the bigger conversation to be had here. So then that's why in my book, I spoke about things like context collapse, where on social media, there is no such thing as context anymore. There are no boundaries. You could think again that what you're saying and sharing and your view is going to be experienced by people who are local to you and share the same view, but it could end up in a very conservative country. It could end up somewhat, there's just no boundaries online. So that's what I prefer to do when I have people that sort of express their so-called disappointment. I even say this in the book because I remember saying it to a client of mine, that your other people's disappointment is not yours to hold.
That's
And I
right.
think that's a very, very important thing to remember. And that's the mindset in which I work with. But because I want to make sure that I'm not just operating from a place of being anti, I will use that as part of my work to explore a bigger conversation.
Well, and I also want to add another, maybe, I don't know, either layer, or I guess I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious to know your thoughts on this, because obviously, I'm sure, Danae, you too, like you just said, somebody saying you're a mother, how could you not, right?
Yes.
We've all gotten these kind of messages. And what I find for me, I've gotten definitely more than three. And I would, let's guesstimate, 98% of the messages that I've gotten have been from people of color in particular.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of ways that the conversation, actually, it's not a conversation, the at me that is started is, you know, as a white person, you should be, or as a person of color, I feel, right? And what I will say is that it adds a layer of complexity for me.
Mm-hmm.
And this is going back to what you were saying kind of in the beginning of the
Yes.
conversation
Yes.
around, what am I allowed to say? What am I not allowed to say? How am I allowed to own my kind of stance or talk about this from my perspective without offending, right? And it's this constant loop in your brain of, what am I allowed to say, right? And what it feels like, and Danae and I've had conversations about this, is in some ways that is what is being led. Like, I'm leading with this as a
Yes.
way to control, as a way to keep you in a certain place, because I know actually that there's certain things you're not allowed to say, or certain ways that you're not allowed to be. And I know that going in. And so I'm going to almost like hold that in front, right? And so it's like you're shutting it down before I can even say anything. And you almost know that you're doing that, maybe unconsciously, but there is some consciousness to it. And so it adds a layer of
Yes.
complexity, I think, for me as a white person out there in this world, where it's like, do you want me to answer you, or do you not want me to answer you? Because it
Right.
feels like a little bit of both is going on. Do you know what I mean?
I do. I do. And when you have both spoken about it, for example, Danae, what have you kind of sort of landed on when it comes to that?
Well, I think you have been an incredible teacher for me in
Mm,
exactly what Vanessa's speaking to, and that there was a way that sometimes I have in the past spoken with a sort of moral authority as a woman of color,
me
and like,
too.
don't come for me because
Yeah.
Yes.
you can't, right? And I think you
Mhm.
speaking to that, and I've heard you speak to that in other contexts, really made me check myself a little bit. And that I think, there's something that you talk about in the book where you just like say, do I believe in inclusiveness really?
Yes.
Right? Like, this is
Really.
how, like, we are being called to ask ourselves, like, do I really want to be in conversation with people? Or do I just want to like make myself like safe in my righteousness and surround
Right.
myself with people who think like me? And for me, it's just, I want to try to understand. And I love another thing
Mm,
you say, Africa, where you say like understanding doesn't mean agreement. And I think we've
right.
got to
Mhm.
get better at like
Right.
being able to drop into that a little bit. Like, I can really try to understand where someone is coming from, and I want to. Like, that's a commitment
Mm,
I feel like I want to make, but it doesn't mean that like my sense of self or my center is diminished because I hear
yes.
you out and because I
Right.
can be present with what you're saying, you know?
Yes. And you know what, Vanessa, I don't even have like a direct answer to that. It's more so other thoughts that come up in the sense that I I found, and I wonder what you both think about this. I found that even around the time that I wrote my open letter and some years before that, I had, without realizing, created a very intolerant audience. I had
Mm.
created an audience that expected me to speak a certain way, an audience that expected me to be the same Africa um, from the point that they found me. So to almost stay frozen in time, wherever they found me, that's the version of Africa that I needed to be. So I wasn't allowed to change my mind. I wasn't allowed to say, actually, no, I won't do that, you know, or to push back in any way. And it's so interesting because I also had other racialized people sort of leading with their identity, because we then do it to each other. It becomes an identity hierarchy. And that's another thing that I was saying, I won't participate in that, you know. But I realized that I had to go through kind of like a shedding process, and to be okay with losing people by saying, no, I'm not, I understand and respect where you're coming from, but I'm not going to participate in that. I actually don't believe that, you know. I don't believe that because you hold a certain identity, that means I have to agree, or I have to, I actually had to say things like that. So it's so interesting. But again, I can only imagine, and these are the conversations and the type of empathy that people, some people don't want to be expressed out loud, to show empathy for you right now as a white woman saying that to me. I think that's insane, that we can then maybe label that as white fragility, as white whatever it might be, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I realized that I had to go through a process of really allowing for people to pull the plug, really allowing for people to unfollow, being okay with people being disappointment, and let new people in, because I really had created an audience that I had become terrified of, that I was scared. Again, because it's my digital home. When you think about it in that way, you're scared to be in your own home. It's filled with strangers who expect you to dress a certain way, speak a certain way, post a certain way. Even who you follow. Oh, I just noticed you follow this person. Again, like looking out for you. Its position is sort of looking out for you, but it's control. But that was a big piece for me. And I don't know if it will resonate with you or not, but I realized it's because I had participated in so many of the games. Okay, you're doing good. She's doing good. She's doing good. And then you do even something or don't do something. Then it's like, what? Whoa, what? Where have you gone? What are you doing? So there's always that sort of control, which made my online space for a time very unenjoyable, because I felt like I was being constantly watched. That's when I would start to put so many disclaimers and caveats in my captions to just cushion everything. So you end up having, and I write about this too, you end up just having a constantly apologetic demeanor, you know, even when you're not saying anything. So I kind of had to, in my own mind, be okay with burning everything to the ground. And it's never even that extreme. We sometimes think that it's going to be a very aggressive process, but for me, it was very important to be okay with being misunderstood. When I wrote the open letter, a lot of people, even people that I knew, unfollowed. They said they were disappointed. This is a right-wing conversation. You know, they didn't expect me to be speaking in this way, blah, blah, blah. But I always say that I think people would have known what to do with me if it was a case of someone leaving the left and going to the right, you know. But my values, and I don't even call myself a liberal or leftist or whatever, but values wise, you can say I am, you know, and I can still speak about these things. So a lot of people did drop off, but it's interesting how you then find people that just meet you where you are. You find people that you don't have to perform for. So for me, the fact that in nearly 1 year since everything that's happening in the world right now in the Middle East, less than a handful of people feel like they can be bold enough to say to me, hey, why haven't you spoken about? That's amazing. That's because I have told them who I am. That is because I have allowed myself to be truly myself, that all those other people that feel uncomfortable have dropped off, and that's fine. So I find that sometimes, even if someone listening to this can't resonate with the idea of building an audience or a platform, this applies to interpersonal relationships and friendships too. You know, you have to be okay with people misunderstanding you and being disappointed, because that allows for the people that meet you at eye level and don't expect you to constantly perform or sort of apologize for your identity and sort of buy into this identity hierarchy thing, which I think is just, I think it's very disturbing. And I refuse to participate in it or to accept it as normal in any way.
Yeah.
I'm laughing that I'm like, you can come for my girl. You might be sorry.
Well, today I'm laughing, even laughing at you're laughing, because the number of times I've come today and been like, so here's what this person said. And today's like, oh no, That's control. You tell them, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay.
Yes.
I'm like, I'll say it. Point it to me.
Honestly,
But,
life is so short. Like even when I think about some of these things, I'm like, I refuse. Life is actually so short. And when you log out and you're out there in the real world with your people every day, just going for a walk, you really realize that whatever we're buying to online and taking as normal is just it's so sinister, which is why I think conversations like this are very important, because I think people might see this, maybe not anymore, as kind of like a niche conversation that's isolated to the online world, but it's really starting to have a real life spill over into our everyday lives. But I think it's just robbing us of so much time and connections and curiosity and humor as well, and creativity. So I don't have any patience for it. No.
And as you said that, what I was thinking is, everything, we won't open up this whole can of worms because that could be another hour conversation, but everything that happened, during the George Floyd situation and Black Lives Matter, a lot of the conversations that and I had, my stepdad growing up was a police officer. He's retired now. And it was a very interesting time, right, for me to kind of be able to hold all these different truths, right? Like I was raised by this man who was gentle and was good to me and all of these things. And what I will say is that it was a year ago, so cut to 2023, my stepdad, they're not married anymore, but my stepdad had a really bad stroke. And he's still in a facility. He has not recovered. And it was a really hard time for my sister and me and my family. And I actually put up a GoFundMe to help his new wife help pay for this facility, right? Because as we know in this country, our healthcare system is fantastic. And the number of people who stepped forward, even knowing, and I said, he's a retired police officer. These are the things that he's done for his community. And people stepped forward and they donated and they sent me these beautiful messages. Right. And so again, it's like, I know the capacity and the capability to hold nuance and to hold opposing truths is out there. And if we can tap into our humanity, we all possess the ability to do it.
Yes.
But it almost takes something like that, I think, for somebody to go, I might believe in, let's say, defunding the police, and I can see this person's individuality and the suffering of this family. And I can see that this woman is saying he's a good man and he's been good to me and he has done these things. And so that's going to trump the other maybe beliefs that I have or the things that I say. Right. And sometimes I think that that's important. We almost need to find moments and experiences in our life where it's like a muscle that's become atrophied, that we can tap into that humanity and remember what it's like to live from that place, not from the other place. Right. Yeah.
I mean, like we could just keep going with you forever, Africa. And but I will say, get Africa's book. The Third Perspective. I'm holding it up again. Is I have notes of things and I'll just talk to you about them another time. But I think you give so many tools, right? And I love the risk assessment framework because there's a way that not everybody's ready to jump into this in the way that we might be talking about in this space. And I just think this book is so supportive of how to get into these conversations, not just online, but in our communities and in our families. So thank you. It's so beautiful and just such a masterpiece. And I love. But we have a lightning round of questions that we ask all of our guests. So the first question I want to ask you is, who have been your greatest teachers, mentors, people who have impacted your path, whether you've known them personally or just their work has really impacted you?
Do you know or have you heard of a woman called Debbie Ford?
Oh, yes.
I know Debbie Ford.
Listen. Debbie Ford, I came across in 2016, very early into me getting sober. And I really credit her book, Dark Side of the Light Chasers, as a book that completely shifted my world. And I just devoured everything that she had ever written, but also all of her seminars and lectures I would just watch. And she was a big introduction for me into the idea of the shadow, actually. So I would say Debbie Ford absolutely opened the door to pretty much everything that I do today.
We love Debbie Ford. Okay, so the next one, the question is around this idea of flow, right? So we know that flow is this state when everything kind of becomes aligned, and hours can go by and it's like blink of an eye. What is that for you? What do you find yourself doing when you kind of find yourself in that state of flow?
For me, it can be having my tea ceremony ritual every single day, which I have every day. Tea, walking, being in conversation, and sex.
Yes. Ooh, yes.
Yeah.
We love to hear it.
Yes.
And what breaks your heart?
Ooh. When I lie and I know I'm lying.
Ooh.
And I know when I'm lying every time.
Oof. That's a powerful one.
Gosh.
I feel that in my bones. As the codependent white liar over here, like for sure. Yes. Ooh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Guys, I'm gonna have to come back for a part 2.
Could you please?
Can you
Yes.
please? We have so much more to talk about.
Scratched the surface. Okay.
We could just do like a series.
Okay. This is just part 1, everybody. She's coming back.
And this is how we'll wrap it up with this last question, which is, what's your favorite food?
Ooh. My favorite food is sadza nyama, which is the staple food in Zimbabwe. So it's like a pounded maize meal and meat on the side. It's very good. It's my favorite meal.
Sounds grounding.
Yes, it is. It is.
Oh, so grateful. So grateful to finally have met you. So grateful to have your presence here. So grateful to just share you with our audience. I'm sure everybody already knows who you are anyway, but then they can at least get a little bit more. Just so grateful.
Thank you.
Africa, I love you. I am just so grateful to know you, sister. And I think I say this often, but I think there are those who have come to the planet at this moment in history to be way showers. You are such like glaring, like you give me faith in the divine, and that like certain people have come here to support us and who we have the propensity to become. And thank you for who you are and the way that you're showing up. I never cease to be so unbelievably inspired by something I hear you say every conversation. It's just like a shift for me. And I know I'm far from alone in that. So I love you. I appreciate you more than I can say. And you have big projects coming up. I'm coming to London. I was just talking to our friend Mimi about it. So you have to come back and talk about this next project that you're working on, because I'm very excited about this too. But thank you so much for coming on and talking to us.
Thank you. I'm just in awe, and I really needed to end my day with this conversation. I'm so, so grateful. I am deeply inspired. And again, your book is next to me every single day. It is underlined to shit, post-it note, and just it feels used. And I can't wait to share everything with you, because it's exactly what I need at this moment in time. And you have made such an impression on my heart, and I'm so grateful. I was actually just speaking about you the other day with another friend, Anelia, who we were all together. Yeah, we were just gushing for about 20 minutes, just talking about you. So to sit with you now, it's amazing. I can't wait to see you. And Vanessa, so thrilled to have met you properly. I can't wait to devour your work and your voice. I'm about to go for a walk, so I'm going to put on the Cheaper Than Therapy podcast and go through the archive. But thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you, my love.